key challenge for any leader is to drive high performance and accountability in their team. Accountability is often seen as elusive, with leaders getting frustrated when team members don't take accountability. The key to driving accountability in any team is for the leader to ensure the team feel that they're fully empowered, enabled, and trusted. In today's episode of The Leadership Project, I'm joined by Paul Butterfield. Paul and I discuss strategies for enabling high-performance teams, fostering trust within the team, and becoming a multiplier as a leader. Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Leadership Project. I'm greatly honoured today to be joined by Paul Butterfield. Paul is the CEO and founder of the Revenue Fly Group. So we're going to be talking a lot today about how we generate and enable our teams into high-performance teams that generate revenue for your business. He also has invented a model called the Customer Journey Enablement Framework, and I'm going to talk about that as well today. So we're going to talk a lot about enabling teams, enabling high-performance teams, and there will be an element associated with bringing customers along for that journey to make sure that those high-performance teams remain customer-centric. So I'm really excited to have this conversation today. I think it's going to be an interesting journey that we go along as we listen to Paul today. So Paul, without any further ado, I'd love to hear from you. Tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to work in this field around enabling high-performing customer-centric teams.
Thanks, Mick. Been looking forward to this. I grew up in sales, and in my heart, I still just think of myself as a seller. And it was an interesting thing. I led teams primarily in tech space, HP originally, and then moving into software very quickly with Microsoft, Intuit, and other teams. And I really never saw the work that I'm doing right now in the last 10 or 12 years coming. But what I did do is, as a sales leader, I discovered two things. One, I was no longer generating a quota and revenue. So I now moved into the debit column. So how do I develop those sales teams to be successful? From a selfish standpoint, I had a number to hit, but also I really believe that we have a moral obligation to those that report to us or that we're responsible for to help them develop professionally in any way that we can. And so now I had to go figure out, well, how do I develop salespeople? Because they're not the same as me. I can't clone myself. So what do I do? And over time, got good enough at it that I was working at a company, a SaaS company, that's a contact center in the cloud. And my EVP surprised me. I went in on a Friday morning. It was in late September. So I went in where we were in a calendar fiscal year. So I walk in with deals to go, ready to have all the usual conversations you would expect to have for the team that I led. And he didn't want to talk about any of that. He went over to his board and he wrote the words sales enablement. And he then went on to describe to me how he'd observed what I was doing with my team and how he wanted that for his entire revenue organization. He was in the process of taking us from about 225 to 500 million over a 3 to 5 year period. And he was going to be doing a lot of hiring, things like that. So he sent me home for the weekend with a challenge. Are you willing to take this on and figure out how to do what you do for one team, for my entire org? And if the answer is yes, come back Monday with high level 30, 60, 90 bullet points. So I took the challenge. Turned out that I really enjoyed the work. And I figured out over time, the reason that I enjoyed it is, as a sales leader, as a leader of any sort, one of my favorite things is, and I'm sure you've seen this, when someone stops doing something that you've been coaching them to do because they know you're going to check, or they know you're going to look at their pipeline or whatever it is, they stop doing it for that reason. They start doing it because they're actually seeing success. They're having better success with prospects. They're more comfortable, whatever it is. That's what I love. And now what I got to do and in building out these enablement functions for various teams was to get to do that across a much larger group rather than just the folks that reported directly to me. So that's how I got into the work. And that's what keeps me in the work, is I really do enjoy that development. You're talking about high performing. And in revenue teams, there are some very specific skills that need to be there for them to be high performing and to be successful and to really be able to differentiate themselves in the marketplace.
There's 3 really interesting things I'm picking up there, Paul. The first is about your own transition, and I want to come back to that. It's probably the first topic I want to unpack. The second one, picking up there that whilst there might be a sales team, everyone in the organization is responsible for generating revenue in the business in some way. They all play their role. The word enablement really came through strongly. And then I love that thing that you've picked up there, which is a very strong leadership attribute, which is it gets to the point where it converts the person from doing it because they were told to do it to doing it because they believe in it. And I think that's an important transition in that process as well. I want to come back to that first part. So the first chapter I want to talk about is that transition from, I'm going to say, gun salesperson who could be out there getting the next $100 million deal versus leader of the sales team, and the transition that's needed there, both by the individual, but also what does the company need to do to set that person up for success?
Boy, where do you want to start? There's a lot there to unpack. Let me start with that transition for the individual themselves. In my experience, it's a very common misperception that if you are, the best of the individual contributors and whatever it is you're doing, whether you're in sales, customer success, any function really, that you would logically be a great leader of those people. And in my experience, both directly and observationally, that's a very different skill set to lead a team. As I said before, I discovered for myself, I can't clone myself. It's not reasonable for me to expect those that report to me to sell or communicate or, operate in the same way I do. They're not me. It makes no sense. But that is a fallacy that I've seen a lot of new leaders get tripped up by. And when they find they can't make everyone in their own image, then they start micromanaging, maybe isn't always the right word, but they start to jump in and at least try to steer the outcomes, as opposed to doing the much more difficult work, which is understanding the individual, meeting them where they are, and then helping them progress to the point where they're doing those things successfully. It's like any of your listeners have kids. It's a lot easier to go clean your kids' room than it is to chase after them to clean the room, right? But to be fair to these new leaders, if they're not given any sort of development, personal development, professional development, any mentoring, then it's going to be difficult for them to figure it out on their own. And so that's where the other part of what you're talking about comes in. And that is, whether we call it enablement, whether we're calling it learning development, whatever we're calling it, what are companies doing for new leaders to help them be successful? And new leaders aren't necessarily just someone who's been promoted internally. I've also seen some of the same challenges when someone is brought in. You may be a seasoned leader at another company, maybe even a direct competitor, so you know the market. But do you know the internal channels to navigate at this company? Do you understand how to lead in this culture? And companies, again, just take it for granted, typically, that, hey, he was a VP, she was a VP somewhere else, so let's just bring them in and they'll figure it out. And that's not fair to the individual. It's not fair to the teams that report to them. And so that's one of the things that, as part of this enablement we're talking about, I find is very critical.
So there's even 2 chapters there I'm going to unpack a little bit further there, Paul. So coming back to those people that you are leading and that you are trying to enable for success, one is the mindset shift that the individual needs to make. So instead of going out and chasing the next $100 million deal, to realize that actually, no, my job is to be a multiplier and get my sales team, might be 10 to 15 people, to get them each to go out and find a $100 million deal. Now, those might not be the right numbers for the business that you're managing, for people that are listening to the show. But the point is, do you want to go out and get the deal yourself? And you've only got 24 hours in the day. I hate to break it to you. You can't bend time and space. Or do you want to enable 15 people that are going to go out and get the next deal that the company needs to survive? And now you're a multiplier. There's 15 of you, not one of you. And they won't be clones of you, like Paul is saying, but you're enabling 15 people to be inspired to go out and do their very best work instead of just being you. Then the second part was this tendency that, particularly if that's their comfort zone, if it's where they come from, Paul, that when things get challenging, to roll up their sleeve and go and do it for them. And I love your analogy of cleaning the bedroom, because what happens when you do that is, what have they learned? What they've learned is that they can depend on you, that if they drop the ball, you're just going to catch it for them.
Right. Yeah. You're the closer. I'll open it, you close it. And that doesn't scale. And the other challenge that I've seen is and let's take it out of sales, but any sort of business situation that you're in, You're building a relationship. You're the face of the company to, interact. Then all of a sudden your leader comes in and you may be okay with that. Maybe you even ask them to, but a minute they do, that credibility that you've worked hard to build with a prospect, with this other individual, starts to erode because all of a sudden they're seeing you differently. Not that they didn't know you had a boss. Of course they did, but you're really just kind of giving up some of that. And in sales, where that translates into is when it comes time for you to go ask for a signature and get into the negotiation phase, they're probably not going to want to deal with you. Bring back the other, if you can't do what I want, go get the other person that you had in the other parts of that conversation. But I also see that again, it goes beyond sales. If we don't let our people stretch, learn, and fail fast, I have no problem with failing fast, because if you're not failing, you're not trying, you're not doing anything different. But if we don't do that for them, it's like you said, they're not going to progress. They're not going to grow. And in my experience, ultimately, they'll move on. Most people don't want to just sit in a job and be comfortable. Most people want to do meaningful work. They want to make a difference. And that's up to us to set them up and develop them for that, not just do stuff for them.
All right. Brilliant. Now I want to come back to the company's role and go a little bit deeper into that. So this is a story that repeats itself in all disciplines, in all industries. It just seems to happen all the time. But let's keep on going with the sales channel as the example. So the role comes up as the new sales manager, sales leader, whatever role you want to call. The natural tendency is to pick the gun salesperson in the company and go, oh, they're our highest performer, and then throw them in the deep end of the pool and see if they'll swim. What I want to put to you is, for me, it should be almost like a new onboarding process. When we bring people onto the company, we do an onboarding process, sometimes better than others, by the way. Not every company does onboarding very well, but we tend to understand that when someone joins a company that we need to onboard them. But when we promote them into a new role, we don't seem to see that same approach. Paul's in a new role. He needs to be onboarded into his new role. What are the expectations? What does he need to know? What doesn't he need to, all of these things that happen when you first join a company. Shouldn't we be doing that when someone gets promoted into a new role?
We absolutely should. And it serves, to my mind, it serves most of the same functions. So when I think of onboarding at a company, at a high level, there's really two things going on there. One is knowledge transfer. And that's probably what a lot of people just automatically say, I got to learn about the product. I got to learn about, how does our deal desk work? I have to learn these things, which is true, but you're only going to absorb so much in the onboarding process. So you deliver as much of that knowledge as you can. But the equally critical thing that a great onboarding experience does is it starts to introduce you to the individuals who are going to be critical to your success in that new role. And in fact, in a good onboarding and a great onboarding experience, what I've seen, those individuals are actually part of it. Instead of a trainer getting up there and teaching you about, whatever the topic is, which they could do, bring in someone from the legal team. If we're talking contracts and red lines and that whole process, bring in somebody from the legal team. Let them talk about it. Let them start to build a relationship with these new people. And that's the same for a new leader. It's a different skill set. So there's going to be some knowledge transfer. They haven't had to report out at pipeline reviews before. They haven't had to forecast before. They haven't had to do these things. So how do you teach them to do those? But now think of also, who are the individuals? What are the communication channels? What are the political channels? And who are the people that they need to be introduced to help them start to build those relationships to be successful? Because in my experience, it's probably some of the same people they've been working with successfully in their previous role, but it's going to be an expanded set because now they're being exposed at a higher level of the organization. I've even seen people that are really good at selling to executives doesn't necessarily mean they're great at communicating internally to executives. So it's just another, don't assume that, because when you're talking to executives about, in your comfort zone, that's great. But now all of a sudden you have to show up at a QBR and you have to teach them how to do that. Give them opportunity, low risk, high reward opportunities to get in front of leadership, get in front of executives, get comfortable with that, coach them through it. So that's just another example I've seen. But yes, leadership enablement and development is critical for new leaders.
So Paul, we've used the word enablement a few times already in the show. What does enablement mean to you?
To me, enablement is ultimately it's an ecosystem, an infrastructure. I'm going to go with ecosystem. So you think about the things that surround a successful employer, a successful team. You've got systems, you've got processes, You've got tools, depending on what they do, the tools are going to vary. You have knowledge, you have soft skills. And so enablement, when it's done well, is looking at the individual holistically. I look at a new employee, this might be helpful, Mick. I look at employee in three basic phases. You've got the new hire, and that's just what they sound like, right? They're trying to figure out where everything is, right? And they're excited, but they don't have a lot of competency yet. And so how do you tap into that excitement, that enthusiasm, all of that? But we want to take them from that new hire status as quickly as we can to what I call conversant. Conversant simply means that they've been given enough knowledge, they've demonstrated enough skill development that you can start to put them in front of, let's just say customers in this case, we've been talking about that. They're still going to be maybe a little more reliant on a leader or a sales engineer, someone than ultimately you want them to be, but they're also not going to ski past, I live in Utah, not going to ski past their tips. And they're going to be able to hold their own and learn in conversations and add value. And so we then take them from that phase into the proficient phase, which means that for the most part, they're executing consistently at or above the performance that's expected. And once they've been doing that for a while, a great enablement ecosystem is also going to have experiences and a pathway ready for them to start to stretch and move into their next role. You can't always provide someone's next career step, but with all the investment that we're doing in employees and great employees, it's in our best interest to make sure that that's there for them if they want it, so that they don't necessarily have to go somewhere else to continue to progress their career. So that's the last piece of great enablement infrastructure is, how do I stretch and grow and get ready for my next role, my next level of responsibility?
There's some really interesting things I'm picking up there, Paul, and really it's about setting the person up for success. But I'll start with what I heard from you is really a crawl, walk, run situation. So don't expect them to be sprinting on day one. Go through, you use the word conversant, then proficient. So what are we doing to get them up that chain, to get them from knows nothing, probably doesn't even know what they don't know, to knowing what they don't know, to being conversant in the job, to being proficient in the job. And there's a progression. And I would say beyond proficient is then probably when they start to excel, they go beyond proficient and start really knocking it out of the park. So kind of a crawl, walk, run approach. And then they're setting them up for success. Do they have the resources? Do they have the knowledge they need? Do they have the resources they need? Do they have the network, the support ecosystem? You use the word. And that support ecosystem could be processes, could be people that they can tap into, it could be tools. They might need a specific tool to do their job depending on what their job is. Okay, very good. Okay, so now we've enabled the person for success and we've taken them on a crawl, walk, run journey. What's the relationship between enablement then and empowerment?
I love that question. I really do. I haven't heard anybody pose it that way before. To me, the enablement, as I said, is really, it's the superstructure. It's the creating that nurturing, supportive growth environment. The empowerment is what you receive from your leaders and the organization. I mean, you need to bring some sense of personal empowerment as well. You can't be completely externally focused. However, in an organization, if those leaders have not created an environment where it's safe to take chances, where it's safe to try something new because it could be a better way, then they're not going to do it. It's not worth getting your head cut off, because you popped up with a new idea. And so that's on us as leaders. How do we create that culture? How do we show that it's okay? How do we lead by example? It's okay. That's the empowerment piece, is showing people that we value you as an individual. We don't know all the answers. Just because that's how we've always done it does not mean that you're not going to find a better way to do it, and let them do that. When I was at HP, one of the things that I took away from there as a leader, actually, I went in there as an IC, as an individual contributor, but when I got promoted, is Hewlett and Packard created what they call the HP way, which was incredibly radical for the late 1940s, early 1950s. If you think of what corporate culture was like, and I won't go into the whole HP way, but the part that really resonated with me as a new leader was that you hire great people, you hire smart, you take your time, you hire smart. You then, all the things we've been talking about, Mick, you set them up for success with the right training, the right relationships, the right resources, all those things they need. You make sure they understand the mission, and then you get out of their way. And if you've done the other things correctly, more often than not, people will surprise and delight you. And they'll also bring your business along in directions you may not have seen. And you'll keep them around longer too, because most people prefer to work in that environment where they are trusted to go and do the job, knowing that their leader's there. They can come back with questions. They can come back for resource asks, that sort of thing. But they don't need to come back and constantly be asking for permission to go and be successful in their job. And they're given the freedom to go achieve the mission in the way that they see best. To me, that's empowerment versus the enablement that we set them up with.
Yeah, I love it. And you bring up a really good point because, I mean, let's face it, we employ these people because we saw something in them. We didn't employ them because they had arms and legs. We employed them for their talent. Why aren't we tapping into that talent? And the best way to tap into that in talent is to enable them for success and then to empower and trust them to get on with it. Once we think they're ready to let them go, let them go.
Let them go. Yeah.
Let them go and do their thing.
Yeah. Let them do their job.
Yeah. Love it. Now, I'm going to put another thought on the table here. I'd love to hear your reflection on this. We do hear a lot of leaders today, I'm talking executive leaders, complain about, oh, people just don't take accountability. They don't take responsibility for the job. They don't take accountability. What I'm picking up in our conversation here is if you haven't enabled them for success, you've set them up for failure. So if you haven't enabled them for success, if you haven't empowered them, if you haven't created the safe space that you spoke about for them to try things and get out and do things, and if you haven't, empowered them to go and do that, why would they? Why would they take accountability and responsibility if they don't feel trusted, if they don't feel empowered, and they weren't enabled for success with the tools and the support network that they need to do what they need to do? How does that sit with you?
That makes a lot of sense to me. I think people then go into survival mode, get by mode. What do I need to do to keep the boss happy and keep my job, but I'm not thriving. I'm not innovating. I'm a C player, which is just enough to not get fired. In the US, we've had a term that's come around in the last couple of years called quiet quitting. I don't know if that's one that has made it around universally. In my experience, that's part of the problem because these people don't feel invested in. And even worse, in some of the economic climate that we've been in, this all goes in cycles, but the most recent one, people are being asked to do more with less. They're seeing coworkers laid off and let go. Someone has to absorb that work. So it's just kind of falling on them. And it just creates a vicious cycle of, I don't feel empowered. I don't feel enabled. And now I'm seeing these, negative things happen around me. No one's talking to me about it. And I have extra work to do. That's a dangerous dynamic that's going on in a lot of companies. And sadly, when the economy starts to struggle, the employees seem to be the last thing that gets remembered because all of a sudden, again, now the company at a corporate level, you're in survival mode. And what do we need to do? And the people just don't factor in often enough in my experience.
Yeah, love it, Paul. So I will say that quiet quitting, it didn't happen to the same extent as what we saw in the US, but universally that term was understood and universally it was experienced to at least some degree. I'll tell you one thing, quite often it was misunderstood. So a lot of people thought quiet quitting was about work hours, like as in people started working 9 to 5 and they would clock off at 4:59 or they'd clock off at 5:01 and not do a minute extra. But to me, it's much deeper. It's not about work hours at all because people started to poke holes in it and saying, oh no, the data says people are working more hours than ever. It was never about the work hours. It was about whether they were invested, to use your word, whether they were working with their full heart and soul because they believed in what they were doing, because they felt empowered, because they felt trusted, because they felt valued. And if they didn't feel those things, they did the bare minimum to make sure that they didn't get fired. That's what quiet quitting was.
Absolutely. I agree with you. Those are the symptoms. The clocking out at 4:59, all of that, those are the symptoms. They're not the cause. And to me, the cause is if you don't feel valued. Most people need a paycheck, so they're going to do what they have to do to keep that coming in, but they're not going to thrive. They're not going to do extra. In my experience, most people want to come and do that. Sure, I've had to manage those exceptions in people that I've hired on my teams. I haven't always got it right, but majority of people really do want to make a difference. They want a chance to stretch. They want a chance to show what they can do, and they appreciate it. Some are less comfortable with it than others. That's another topic. And so, the way that you're helping develop and lead them is not always going to be the same to get them to the same place. But most people seem to thrive in that environment once they realize they can do it.
There's always going to be some outliers, Paul, but I agree with you. The vast majority of people want to turn up to work every day and do their very best work. They don't want to come in and just do the bare minimum and just get along. Yeah. All right, brilliant. Now, I'm going to take us on a little bit of a twist now, because I'm going to say that the chain that we've been on right now has been a very individual chain, about the individual leaders and about the individual leader then enabling their individual contributors. What about the collective, Paul? Because you talk about enabling high-performance teams. What does a high-performance team look like to you?
To me, teams go through, and there's nothing scientific about this. Is purely experience. Going on 3 decades, I guess, of experience. That the teams go through an evolution. I mean, you're probably familiar with the forming, the storming, the norming, those phases of a team. And I've seen those. But for me, I look at it a little differently. And that is, you've got a new team that comes together for whatever reason. You could have a new leader coming in. You could have reorganizations, any number of reasons that teams are coming together in different ways. And how is that team? Do they understand why? But let's start with that. Again, I don't think that leadership can over-communicate, and especially when it comes to any sort of change. Change is difficult. Nobody likes it, even positive change. So over-communicate. Help people understand why they're on that team. We talked before, just as important as for the individual to understand the mission, the team needs to understand the mission. The team needs to see that they're being led by someone who leads, for example. Leads through example, I should say. I'm a big believer in the servant leader model or outlook. I've worked for some amazing leaders that I learned that from, so I won't take credit there. But I've found that is key to getting a team to start to gel. But then you've got people that are, okay, we understand the mission. We're here together. We know what we need to do. We're going to do it. And so they're working together and they're getting things. Think of it as I talked about developing the rep. You've got new hire. You've also got new team. And they're figuring it out, but they're doing their best. They're working through it. But we want to get them into that next phase of being a team. And that is kind of like I talked about in individual development. They're not doing something because they're being inspected or they've been asked to do it. They're doing it because the team is successful. They're doing it because they feel part of something bigger. Now, as a leader, that's up to us to cultivate that. We can get into some of that if you want. Some of it's very little things like celebrate the little wins, making sure that you are consciously, publicly sharing credit where credit is due. You're helping build their brand within the company. There's a lot of things you can do as a leader that are causing this to happen, but you want to get them to where they feel like they're part of something bigger, that this team is something they're excited about. And the ultimate state of that manifesting is, again, they're not doing it now because they're doing it because they're part of this mission, they believe in it. Ultimately, they're doing what they do and they're succeeding because they would never dream of letting their other teammates down. And I haven't always had teams that get to that level. The last few that have reported to me did. And it's an amazing experience to watch. They almost become self-tuning. The team becomes self-tuning at that point because the level of communication gets so good. And the way that people actually care, right, about the success of the team as opposed to just themselves. So again, there's a lot that goes into developing and nurturing and creating that kind of culture, which is 100%, not just on the leader that team reports to. But now let's go up. You talk about multiple teams, right? So I am an SVP. I have multiple functions reporting to me. What am I doing to not only set that, we're looking for that tone and to create that kind of culture of development for the leaders, the VPs and the directors that report to me, but how am I also modeling it? And then we go back to that leadership development we talked about. How am I investing in them so that they can go in turn and be that kind of leader for their team? And ultimately, it does have to come from the top. Now, I've worked in organizations where perhaps at the C level, well, not even the C level, but you get up high enough, there maybe isn't a great culture, but you work for a great CRO or you work for a great, senior executive that creates that culture within a culture. But ideally, this should be something that the entire leadership team is supporting.
So I'm hearing multiple things here, Paul. I'd love to play it back to you and get your feedback on what I'm taking away. So first of all is understanding the purpose. What is the purpose? What is the mission? Then understanding why am I here? What role do I play in that? So where's my personal connection to that purpose? Then we start getting into the why are we here, which is more the purpose alignment. And getting to that point where I loved what you said about, we get to the point where they're not just doing it because they believe in what they're doing. They're not just doing it because they want to do it. They now are doing it because they don't want to let other people around them down. And I think there's an element around that same time of realizing they can do so much more together than they can individually. So the collective firepower is so much more than any of them individually can do. And when they get to those moments of realization, that's when something magical starts to happen.
That's a great way to put it. It is magical. and you can't make it happen. Again, my experience that what you can do is set up the conditions for it and nurture it, but it is magical when it does happen because it has to be organic. You can't make it happen, right? Yeah, so it is. It is a really cool process to see. One of the things, if it's okay to share, that I look back over the last couple of years of leadership that I personally, it was a highlight for me is before the economic crash, of 18 months or not economic crash, but the troubles that we started seeing, especially in tech in the last 18 months or so, there was an incredible hiring boom going on. I know for a fact that every person, I had about a team about 20 during that time period, and every one of them was being recruited constantly. And a couple of them even came to me and said, hey, I'm looking at this or that. But during that time, where we didn't ask someone to leave, put it that way, I only had one person that actually went and took another role somewhere else. And I attribute at least some of that to the fact that, again, they weren't staying because of me, or at least not directly. They were staying because they were very happy in the work they were doing. They were very happy in the relationships and the team culture that they were in. And they recognized that there was still more for them to learn and develop. And they also recognized that what we had was a bit unique. And when you jump off and you go somewhere else, you may find it again. But as you said, it's magical. You may not. And so money is important, but people do value other things. And that was my takeaway from that 2-year period or so when we were able to, for the most part, keep. And of course, I was also finding ways for them to invest and grow and all of that as well. But yeah, it was a lot of work. It wasn't easy, but worth it.
Yeah, they definitely need those opportunities to continue to learn and grow, or they'll get a little bit frustrated. But what I'm picking up is a sense of purpose of the team, a sense of belonging to the team, a sense of identity of the team, right? So individually and collectively, people now feel purpose, belonging, and identity, and they wouldn't consider going somewhere else because they know that they've landed somewhere. I'm going to use the word again, magical. They've landed somewhere where the exhilaration of a high performance team is something you don't always get. And if you find it, you're going to stick around. Yeah, I love it. Tell me what role trust plays in all of that. How do we get those high performing individuals to trust each other? Because it won't work if they don't trust each other, Paul.
Again, I'm going to start. Trust starts with us, or starts with the leadership team. Some of the best leadership teams I've worked in fact, the last corporate job that I was in was with an ed tech firm called Instructure. And I reported to the CRO. And he was one of the most gifted individuals that I've worked for. I've worked for him 3 times in my career. So that tells you something. Either he's an exceptional leader or I'm an idiot. Take your pick. But one of the things that he is very good at is he is a student of Patrick Lencioni and Lencioni's theories on organizational behavior and organizational development. And so he helped us develop as a leadership team into that core of a team one. But that concept of a team one, the biggest part of it that I always loved is if you're part of a truly functioning, again, team one, that's the Lencioni term, but you are looking out for the best interests of the group. You're not playing politics. You're not hoarding resources. You're not hoarding information because it's going to help your team get ahead. You are comfortable enough that you are sharing within a leadership group. So that's critical. If as a leader, you're not in that type of environment, it's not that you can't go create it for those that report to you, but in my experience, it's more difficult. So I guess I'm just acknowledging and appreciating those leaders I worked for that understood how important organizational health was for us as leaders first. Then you're taking that, and that's when you can start to model it. And this is why I think it was so helpful. So at this company I just mentioned, because my boss, Frank, was a very visible CRO, my team saw that he walked the walk. They knew what he believed in. And then when I'm coming to them and I'm modeling the same things, I'm asking them to model the same things, it just works so much better. But that's the key, is that organizational health. And what are you doing? And like any living organism, what worked this quarter, next quarter may not work next year. And that's part of the challenge too, is, there are so many external factors that are influencing your team, their success, their attitude, their concerns, and how do you evolve? And that's where that over communicating as a leader part, it comes in. Most people can be trusted with more. I mean, there are financial things that legally you can't share. I get that. But in general, my experience is there are much more information that people can be trusted with that would help them be more successful and better in their roles. The companies hold back. And so that's why when I say over communicate, so I mean, really think about most knowledge workers, especially, but everybody to some degree just responds better when they understand why they're being asked to do something. So don't be a miser, right? Be smart, but share that information, help them get the vision, help them get behind it.
Yeah, brilliant. There's a big theme that I'm picking up throughout our conversation. Servant leadership has come up a few times in the enablement of people for success, but I'm also hearing a lot in everything you talk about, Paul, about role modeling the behaviors that you want to see. So if you want people to trust each other, it starts with you trusting them. I love that.
Trusting the other leaders. That's where I was talking about that too. So if I report to a CRO, I need to trust the other folks that are on my team too. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. All right, love it. All right, now, another big part of what you do is you talk about this customer enablement journey. We've spoken a lot internally now. Let's go outside. What does it take to have this customer enablement journey and to make sure our team is customer-centric and not always internally focused?
Wow. You got another episode? Well, let's hit some of the highlights. So it's interesting to me, almost fascinating, because I've worked for some world-class companies and I've worked for some that maybe aren't as well known. And it doesn't seem to matter. Very highly educated, successful, smart executives that will sit around in a room and talk about where customers are in our sales process, where customers are in our, doesn't matter, fill in the blank. When the reality is our customers and prospects are just as highly educated, just as ambitious, and they couldn't care less about our sales process. But so many companies are still very focused on that. If you even look at, for example, in the world of sales, in technology, so many companies still start off, Mick, hey, I'd like to get 30 minutes with you. I'd like to show you a demo of our product. Why? I don't know anything about you. How do I even know if the product's a good fit, right? And so when I think about this customer journey, how are we cross-functionally looking through the prospect's lens, looking through our customer's lens collectively, and then designing our processes, the way we do things, our systems, our marketing to speak to them. You and I think talked maybe it was before the show even about the fact that think about how many websites you go to that are at their core a catalog of product features. Sure, they might have some customer stories and feature benefit, but ultimately they're not really talking about the business outcomes and the challenges that the people that are typically buying from them are dealing with and are successfully solving for with their product. That's just one example. And how do we take that view? Another one is when you're dealing with customers and you have a customer success, you have sales, you have, the implementation team that's bringing them on. You've got customer success teams. How are those teams thinking about the customer? Are we anticipating and collecting consistent customer inputs? And I'm not talking NPS scores, although that could be part of this, but I'm talking about in the human interactions. What are the inputs that we should be reasonably expecting to see from customers? How are we collecting those? How are we empowering and teaching people to have those conversations, collect them, and to uncover those things? And then how are we institutionally using them to create a better experience, not just for that customer, but for all customers, as opposed to sitting around, again, going back to what I said a few minutes ago, in a room and just trying to figure it out on our own? That to me is true. That's customer centricity, is thinking about what problems are they solving? Why are they coming to us? And then how do we have their voice? And a lot of times companies I'll talk to about this will say, well, yeah, but we don't want to blow up our sales cycle, right? We're giving, you're talking about giving all the control in the sales process over customer. And no, I'm not. You actually, if you do it well, the sales cycle shouldn't slow down at all. And what you're doing instead is creating a better experience. And the reality is customers are going to buy when they're going to buy. Sure, you can influence that with silly discounts. You can influence that with other tactics. But again, long term, is that what makes sense? The pragmatist in me knows you're going to have to sometimes do things like that because you got a number to hit at the end of the quarter. But we should be thinking, as we think strategically about how we're dealing with our customers, how are we aligning to their buying journey? How are we facilitating their buying journey? And everybody, it goes back to people that may never talk to a customer in product and product marketing, but all those groups are part of that enablement.
That's really powerful. I'm going to share 2 chapters or 2 pillars that I took away from that. One is to make sure that our teams come back to the reason why our organization exists is actually to solve our customers' problems. And then a byproduct of this is if we are able to articulate the customer's problem even better than they can, they actually assume that you got the solution.
Right. Yeah. You summarized it better than I did. No, I love that. A lot of times companies think that your customer needs to like you. Like could be defined different ways if they're going to do business with you. That's not my experience. My experience is that if you are someone that they can see is authentic, I mean, authenticity has always been a big deal. People have no patience for anything less at this point. It just seems like it's more that way. Number one, are you authentic? Are you a sincere person? Number two, are you a serious person? This is what I'm picking up on what you had just said. Can you bring value to the conversation? If I'm selling to you and you've been in your career doing what you do for 23 years, I'm not going to know as much in everything you do. However, if I've honed my craft, if I've understood your world, understood the industry, understood that, I also probably bring the benefit of, so let's just say you're a CIO. I talk to a lot of CIOs. I probably can bring some insights and some things to the conversation that just because I get to talk to a lot of folks that do what you do, you may not have come across. And so how do you bring those? And then the third thing is, can I empower you or sell you or bring you something that enables you to succeed or achieve something that you couldn't already do on your own? Those are the three things. Then people will do business with you. If you happen to make some friends along the way, that's great. But it's authenticity. Are you a serious individual that brings value to the every conversation? And can you enable or empower me to do something that I couldn't do before I met you? And as companies are thinking about their processes, that's how they need to be looking. Are we satisfying those needs?
Yeah. And yet people are starting with the solution. They're not starting with the problem and the building the trust that you know what you're talking about, that I'm going to bring value to this conversation, all of these things along the way. So yeah, really powerful. Then the second part I picked up in the earlier part was the word experience. And what jumped into my head, Paul, was we ask leaders this question, by the way. We ask leaders, we say, what's it like to experience you as a leader? Well, we could also make that a meta question and say to your customers or say to your teams, what's it like for the customer to experience us? And if the answer is, oh, those guys, they're so hard to deal with. They just want to jump to the sale in the first conversation. What's it like to experience us? And I think that's a really powerful question for everyone to think about as you're listening to the show as well. So yeah, really, really powerful, Paul. So funnily enough, we came back to the word enablement, but now instead of enabling our teams, we're now enabling our customer success. So what do we bring to the table that enables their success? And if the customer sees you as a trusted partner that is integral to their success, of course they're going to want to do business with you. How does that sit with you?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. I've never seen a situation where you didn't still need to, at some point, ask for a signature, right? Let's just talk about business relationships in terms of whether it's sales, whether it's maybe it's a strategic alliance. It could be any number of things that we're doing here. At some point, somebody has to say, okay, let's do this thing. But what I don't think it needs to feel like is what most people think of as a traditional sales close. If we've built a great business case together, it's not us telling them, it's together. Did we assess? Did we understand? Did we talk to the right stakeholders? Is there a reason to do business together? Again, this might not even just be sales. It could be any number of business relationships, but is there a good, compelling business case for both parties to do it? If the answer is yes, then the type of sales closing techniques that a lot of people think of and still even try to use become unnecessary. And you're still going to, because if you're going through, it's not that you're not going to have objections, you're not going to have concerns, but you're building a case with them. You're not telling them how things are. You're helping them see. That's maybe what I'm trying to get at. Remember the old, it's been a while now, Leonardo DiCaprio movie, Inception? To me, that's what this experience is like. You're not manipulating customers or prospects, but you are giving them the information. And it's kind of like we said at the beginning, rather than doing a person's job for them on your team, instead of telling a customer what they need to do, we're doing the more difficult work of helping them see it for themselves and giving them the knowledge and planting that seed and working with them until they can see it themselves. And sometimes they won't. Bad news early is good news. That's the other thing about everything we're talking about here, Mick. If you're doing it well, you're also going to create a better experience by helping people self-sort earlier in the relationship, because it's not always going to make sense. But they're not always going to be in that job. They're not always going to be at that company. And I think most people will walk away from experience like that being like, wow, they didn't try to force me into, something that didn't make sense for me. They understood what we needed to do. And it's just a better way to do business, better way to, and most people enjoy it better. Sales should never feel icky, right? Customers, I mean, you're going to have hard days, but there's a better way to do it. That's what I try to help people see.
All right, brilliant, Paul. Now, I want to share something with the audience because we did use sales as a key theme throughout this discussion. But if you listen to this back again, and you could replace the word sales with almost any function, and everything that Paul is talking about still applies. It's about enabling people for success. Are we enabling our customers for success? The last point we started, all the way back to, are we enabling our leaders, particularly our new leaders, for success? Are we enabling our teams for success? Are we energizing them and bringing them together as a high-performance team so that they rely on each other for success, so that we become a multiplier? This is what this is all about, enablement and multiplication of impact through other human beings. This is the heart of what Paul's message is looking to share with us today. All right, Paul, I'd like to now take us to our rapid round. These are the same 4 questions that we ask all of our guests. So what's the one thing you know now, Paul Butterfield, that you wish you knew when you were 20?
Patience. Patience to, yes, I'm going to stick with patience. Patience to slow down and listen and understand the perspectives of others. The world is much less black and white than I thought it was when I was 21. And I wish I'd understood that sooner, because I had to have some rough edges knocked off of me as I went through and made some mistakes. So that's the biggest thing. I'm not perfect at collaborating and building relationships now, but it's something I've had to work at. It would have been great to have it, earlier in my career.
All right. Nice. Thanks for sharing. What's your favorite book?
It's going to go back. It's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. When I was at uni, I actually had the privilege of working for Stephen. Stephen was an OB, an organizational behavior professor at my university at the time. 7 Habits was still being shopped to publishers. It was written, but he was still a small consulting group off campus. And that was an education that I got paid to do, because Stephen would. And so I've always carried that through my career. And I remember my first sales leadership role after being promoted, I went back and I reread that book, because there's so many great leadership principles in there that I still try to apply.
What a wonderful opportunity. That's just amazing. Okay, I'm going to go off script here for a second.
It was pretty cool.
What's your favorite of the seven habits?
Probably not a surprise based on the rest of our conversation, but seek first to understand. That applies in every aspect of your life. I can't think of an area, personal or professional, that doesn't benefit.
All right, brilliant. What's your favorite quote?
This is one that actually comes from, he's well known in the field of sciences, earth sciences, Henry B. Eyring. And so may surprise you a little bit, but he said that if you treat everyone that you meet as if they're going through something incredibly difficult in their life, more than half the time, you'll be right. So be kind. Now, I'm paraphrasing it. He said it much more eloquently, but it has always stuck with me. Yeah. You don't know what's going on. Someone may have the perfect life on the outside, but you don't know. So be kind. It doesn't cost you anything.
Yeah, right. I love it, Paul. Yeah, thank you for sharing that as well. So finally, there's going to be people that have listened to this, Paul, and they're really curious about this concept about enablement. They may very well be in your field around sales enablement or revenue enablement or customer experience enablement. How do people find you, Paul, if they'd like to know more or they'd like to take advantage of your services?
The easiest way is through LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn, always happy to connect with people there. If they also would like to, they can go to revenueflywheelgroup.com, which is the company website. And there's a place there that they can just book time directly with me. But I'm fine, either of those. I'm always happy to talk with people. And I'm a very curious person. So I'm always interested in hearing how other people are viewing the things that you and I have been talking about as well. So would love to hear from some listeners.
All right. Wonderful, Paul. We'll put those links in the show notes as well. Makes it easier for people to find it. Thank you so much for your time today, for sharing your experiences, your insights and your wisdom. I think it was a wonderful conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I know that
Me too.
The audience will as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mick.
You've been listening to The Leadership Project. In the next episode, I'll be joined by clinical psychologist Gina Gorlin. Gina specializes in the mindset of entrepreneurs and innovators. You don't want to miss this. Don't forget to subscribe to the Leadership Project podcast. We bring you live streams, video podcasts, and curated videos on all things leadership, personal development, and high-performance mindsets every single week. Thanks Thank you for listening to The Leadership Project at mixbeers.com. A huge call out to Faris Sadek for his video editing of all of our video content, and to all of the team at TLP. Joanne Goes On, Gerald Calabo, and my amazing wife, Say Spears. I could not do this show without you. Don't forget to subscribe to the Leadership Project YouTube channel, where we bring you interesting videos each and every week. And you can follow us on social, particularly on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Now, in the meantime, please do take care, look out for each other, and join us on this journey as we learn together and lead together.